Hello and welcome once again to the White Lotus of Light conversational series. I am joined by the amazing J. Philip Jimenez.
Thank
and we
you.
are doing today episode 2 of the Black Nobility series. And Philip is actually visiting in the States, and so it was a little easier to arrange the time on this one. And how are you doing today, Philip?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I went running with my son. I ran 5 kilometers. I'm because I didn't train when I was in Mongolia. I was hardly doing almost nothing. And I thought when I got here, I wouldn't be able to run with him in the park. So I'm relieved that I could run with him and do the 5K. And that's my big,
Fantastic. Good
that's
for
my
you,
big
man. That's
summer
awesome.
thing.
See, viewer, we're humans, and
Well, if we're serious about what we say we want to do, exercise is really absolutely essential. You can't get away
yeah,
from it. You must do it.
I
You
work
must.
out pretty much daily, and I agree with
I
Philip.
know you do.
It really helps you your mental clarity, especially dealing with that kind of information like the stuff we're going to present today. And actually, on that note, there's something I was toying with saying at the outset of this, and I want to say it. One of the things that I find the most disturbing, and I might have said it in the last video, I don't remember, it's been a long time since we shot that, is there's this phenomenon called blackpilling. Like, some people refer to blue pilling as like kind of going back to sleep and trusting corporations and authority. And then there's red pilling, and this is from The Matrix, the scene where Morpheus gives the two different pills, the blue or the red pill. Blue, go back to sleep, Neo. Red pill, find out how the world really works. Some people have tried to make it about a Republican Democrat thing. No, that's not what it means. Because if you're a partisan Republican and just support any and all Republicans, you're still blue pilled.
You're a dupe.
Period. And that doesn't mean there aren't good Republicans, and there's even some good Democrats that are still in there, some decent people, especially at the lower levels, are people who just aren't very sophisticated, really, in their understanding of the world, but happen to be in politics. But so it doesn't mean that. It means being totally asleep and trusting governments and corporations, regardless of your political affiliation, is blue pilling. Red pilling is waking up to the fact that, as a general rule, governments and corporations are not looking out for the best interest of humanity. They're self-interested actors with varying degrees of corruption, depending. And then there's the concept of black pilling and white pilling. And I like to white pill people. What white pilling people means is to tell them, and I honestly believe this, I'm not just saying this, viewer, this is a deeply held core belief of mine, the forces of the more reasonable elements of humanity will prevail. They really will. And you'll really start to see the shift take place around 2025 when we switch out of the Kali Yuga and into the Dwapara Yuga. There's a 300-year crossover period, but things will start to get noticeably better sometime in 2025. And by 2027, 2028, things will be even better. And a lot of the people who are committing these crimes against humanity currently will be being arrested and tried. And then by 2030, I've been told from a variety of sources, including personal gnosis from the angels, meaning what the angels, as an angelic magician, have told me personally, by 2030, things are going to get a lot better. And actually, even some hidden technology of the kind that I talked about in my interview with Walter Bosley, anti-gravity, free energy, or zero-point energy, whatever, tabletop cold fusion, some kind of sustainable energy source, and anti-gravity and some other things are going to be brought out into the open, that are being held by reasonable mystery schools. And so that's white pilling. Black pilling is what I want to talk about. Black pilling is something I really don't like. If you're in truth circles, and especially now we're living through the apocalypse, the great unveiling, there's a lot of information that's true that's pretty disheartening, to put it mildly. All this goddamn trying to, the vision of Davos of wanting everyone in a pod with a chip in their brain and eating bugs, filthy bugs, and even like fly larvae, and now they're even saying not just bugs to help the planet, but even fake avocados made from plants. So plant-based plant food, right? And it's made of seed oils, which is incredibly bad for you. So even the vegans are mad about that one. Some of my vegan friends who are woke politically were kind of like, well, might as well eat bugs. It's better than eating animals, blah, 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 and had their whole rationale around that. And I totally respect the vegans who want to protect the planet and protect the animals. I get it. Some amount of vegans are pretty, militant about that. But even they are starting to see the shape of things to come when they see these fake avocados made from rapeseed oil, actually, among other things. And seed oil, as a general rule, is really bad for us. Really, really bad for us. Cancer causing all this kind of stuff. And so when you look at this array of stuff that Davos is doing, it's chilling and it's horrifying. And I believe that once they realized that in order to further their agenda, they had to bring certain things out into the public and start doing things like all these celebrities are suddenly like, oh, eat bugs, it's so great, I love it, right? All this trash like Nicole Kidman and just more and more. I think that sellout scumbag guy, I can't think of his name, one of the late night talk show hosts is like shilling.
Well, they're all scumbags. They're all scumbags.
Fair point, Philip. Anyways, when you see all this information laid out there, it can seem really chilling and really horrifying. And it can seem like, what can us regular people do? Like, we have no chance against it. And having those feelings is reasonable. And I think it's a stage like the dark night of the soul that you kind of actually have to push through until you can get to the white pill side of things. But some people get stuck in it. And again, that's sad. But what I do not like is when people start pushing it like, we can't win, and even if we win, it'll be a barren wasteland afterwards, and blah, 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 there's no hope, and da, da. And you might as well go see if you can get a check from Klaus Schwab, because you're helping their agenda by getting people to give up. Mind you, real world, indisputable psychological operations attacks are done on enemy soldiers to get them to lay down their arms.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to do the same thing to you when they get you to think that there's no hope. If there was no hope, they wouldn't be doing a relentless barrage of propaganda. If there was no hope, they wouldn't need to say anything. They would just take over.
Go ahead and do it.
So there is hope. There's definitely hope. And that's why the propaganda is relentless. So don't blackpill yourself. You know, like, you don't need to know every little detail of what Davos is up to. When you start feeling overwhelmed, that's a good sign. Enough of that. Go outside, spend some time in nature, meditate, spend some time with your family, your friends. You don't need to know every little thing that Davos is up to, you know, or whatever, fill in the Illuminati type group of your choice. You know, you don't need to know every little thing. And it's ironic that I'm saying this, given the context of what Philip and I are going to launch into, but I just want to put that out there at the beginning, because if you watch this video and you start to get overwhelmed, turn it off. Turn it off and go find something, like I said, that is going to make you happy. Go exercise. Eat some good, healthy food, whole food, you know, that's clean, organic if possible, if you can afford it. Go meditate. Do whatever you need to do. Take care of yourself. Do some art. Do some writing. Write some poetry. Get your feelings out on paper, you know. Don't let it overwhelm you. So with that caveat, today, Philip and I are going to... Philip is visiting his son in New York. And so Philip is still doing deep research about the I always say it wrong.
The Guelphs and the Ghibellines.
The Guelphs and the Ghibellines. And he's planning on, he's going to do the heavy lifting on a future show. I've happened to had some time now that I moved down here to my new place, as you can see, to do some deep research. In particular, I've read this incredible, excellent book that I highly recommend, Financial Vipers of Venice, and it has
very good, Joseph Farrell, very good.
By Dr. Joseph Farrell. He's amazing. Joseph, if by some chance you see the show, because say Walter Bosley told you to watch my show, please come on my show. I'm going to ask you in your forum at some point. But I read that, and I've skimmed a little bit of some of the references of like City of Fortune here by Roger Crowley. About Venice. And then I haven't even touched this one, but I plan to read this super tome. It's thick. A History of Venice by John Julius Norwich. And so I was able to complete and read this entire book since the last time we did the and it's quite dense and heavily cited. Joseph Farrell is very responsible, much like
he's wonderful. He's wonderful.
Yeah. Much like
huge.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, he's been a big kind of searchlight out there. If you've caught some of his presentations or interviews, he shines a light on some things in he's very effective, very thoughtful, and he's an amazing scholar and fantastic researcher. Great. You can't go wrong.
And like Philip and Walter, and I'm sometimes sloppy about this, I need to get better. Joseph is very good about delineating fact from speculation, even reasoned speculation, or extreme, what he calls high octane speculation, or way out in the twig of speculation. He's excellent about delineating between these are the facts to give you context, and here's what I think it means, supposition or reasoned speculation. And so I really like that. And so today, I'm going to be doing the heavy lifting because, Philip's just going to chime in where he can, but we're going to cover a bit of what I'm increasingly thinking is the most important event of the past 1,000 years, other than currently unfolding events. And that's the Fourth Crusade, and how that relates to the discovery of the New World. And then touch a little bit, if we have time, in the Florentine super companies, and also the fact that the population myth about overpopulation, especially, let's be clear, poor people, there's too many poor people, because none of these Venetian Black Nobility or rich English gentlemen are saying, we need less rich English gentlemen with a huge impact on the environment. No. And mysteriously, none of the current wealthy environmentalists, ding, are like concerned about buying oceanfront property, like the Gates family, the Obamas, Martha's Vineyard, John Kerry, the climate czar, Martha's Vineyard. None of them seem terribly worried about rising ocean levels in regards to their multi-million-dollar investments. And sure, Gates has enough money to write that off, and people will be like, oh, he's just buying it for 3 years and they'll be underwater, blah, blah. Okay, I don't buy that for a second, but sure, if you want to believe that, John Kerry is not that wealthy, and neither is, especially the Obamas are not that wealthy. So they have a very sizable portion of their income. I guess John Kerry has a fair amount through his wife, Teresa Hines, but it's nonetheless, they're buying oceanfront property they intend to keep, because they know that,
of course,
some of the stuff they're saying is not accurate. Mind you, I am an environmentalist, meaning I believe in protecting habitat, especially old growth forests, and making sure that it can grow back. It's got to be protected. Coral reefs, protecting species. We've got to do that, including perhaps taking genetic samples of things like the white rhino and working on bringing them back at some point. I think that's a noble use of bioengineering stuff. And then cleaning up pollution. I just don't rate CO2 at anywhere near the top of that list. I don't believe a lot of that stuff. I think a lot of this has to do with actually weather weapons being used, and also solar cycles. And I'm not debating that the weather's changing. Clearly it is. I think the sources of it are a little questionable, and I'm very frustrated the environmental movement has been hijacked from protecting species and habitat and complex life and cleaning up pollution to it's CO2. And who's the problem? You are. You're the problem. It's your footprint. Oh, and by the way, we exempted yachts and private jets from these climate controls. So we're going to touch on the way that actually traces back to our good friends, the Venetian Black Nobility. This idea of there's too many poor people. And mind you, they were saying this back in the 90s. So they were saying there was too many poor people way back then, when there was, I think, less than 1 billion people on the planet back then. Maybe
they were saying, that this has been a common theme for the oligarchy since the ancient. First of all, how's my voice? Is it too aggressive or?
Nope, I can hear you.
Fine. Okay,
sounds great.
This goes back to the ancient Greeks. There was, I think it was the War. They said, well, this will also allow us to do some culling of the population. The oligarchy has always felt there's too many people. There's not really absolutely nothing new in that. Then you have these Malthusian depopulation, these ghouls essentially in the aristocracy, who started what was it, the World Wildlife, was it the WWF, Prince Bernhard and Prince Philip, right? And then Prince Charles as well. And obviously the idea that the CO2 is a problem is a farce. And you can go back to the 19th century and see how the British were concerned that if the rest of the world industrialized, that eventually people were going to come for the resources that the European aristocracy was reserving for itself. And so the idea was we need to promote this idea that humans are the cause of potential cause of catastrophic environmental degradation, and that we have to oversee these things. That's why they always step in with their sustainability. We'll tell you how you can progress, how you whether you can engage in any kind of development. So yeah, this goes back to the 19th century, and of course, and before. It's a constant theme, and it gets into something. I'm just going to touch on a few things you said.
Sure, please.
You talked about the beachfront I mean, I totally agree with you. I do environmental work in Mongolia, mostly engaging with local populations, and also the mining community, and also some government with regard to preserving freshwater in Mongolia. Lake Hoofskull, for instance, is under some threat, and there's been some degradation. There's some problems, and we're working with my NGO to solve these problems. And what else? Oh, there's a little lake in Ulaanbaatar that we've been working on cleaning up, the only natural lake there. So I'm very much pro-environmental myself, and I decry the billions of masks, these ridiculous face diapers that people are tossing out now. The ocean is full of billions of these things. So it's clear that there's some kind of hypnosis, dark hypnosis going on, when you can go back to the late 50s through the 70s, and you can see they said that there was global cooling. Human beings were causing global cooling, and we were going to all freeze to death. That didn't happen. They said, oh, you know what? We were wrong. It's actually global warming. That's what's going to happen. And then they had all
that was too specific, and so they did it to
climate change. No matter how many of their predictions fail to come true, no matter how the evidence of your own eyes will not dissuade those who have been hypnotized to believe the rhetoric, regardless of the evidence that would present itself to your own senses if you would allow it. But it's as though people have been hypnotized. With the beachfront property that you're talking about, you can bring up something obvious like that. In fact, there is no rise in the sea. Ice in the poles the North Pole is the same as it pretty much within normal fluctuations, and there's nothing. There's no rise in sea levels, and you could verify these things if you cared. What's very interesting to me is that the people who claim to care the most are the least concerned with actual data and testing the hypotheses against conflicting data. That's what's so bizarre to me. And I think that's what maybe you can help us touch on, if not in this episode, in another one. How does an occultic aristocracy persuade people to part with their reason and the evidence of their own senses, and actually feel virtuous in giving up those incredible gifts that we're born with, to sacrifice their reason?
I saw this really succinct explanation of it, that essentially you make people afraid and then you give them a ritual, right? Like and I'm real curious if we get hit by the algorithm for our discussion thus far. We'll see what happens. I don't think we're big enough yet, but we'll see. I'm fine to run this out there, and we'll see what happens. But we'll be careful with the C word in particular. That seems to get hit harder. So you give people a ritual that doesn't matter, that doesn't change anything, that makes them feel like they're part of the solution. And once you get people in that amygdala fear thing for a certain period of time, they will just cling to authority. It's the Stockholm syndrome thing, in order to have the authority save them. And there's also there's a deeply rooted thing in Western culture, of the savior, the messianic savior thing. And it's in at least two of the three Abrahamic faiths. I don't know enough about Islam to know if they have a similar type thing in there, but they definitely, that the Messiah, which has not come according to the Jewish people, because they were unable to complete enough chanting in the temple, or has come in the case of the Christians, and will come again, right? A misunderstanding of that teaching, which is actually about finding the Christ, all of us finding the Christ consciousness within ourselves, right? Jesus
Yeah.
wanted us to be, Yeshua wanted us to behave like him, right? But then he was deified intentionally to make people think they couldn't do it themselves. They couldn't be that good. They couldn't actually help their neighbor. They couldn't actually feed the hungry and help the sick and all that stuff. That instead,
That's a very interesting point, because I was thinking about Saint-Germain the other day. Well, I think about Saint-Germain every day, but you know, he's somebody who, I think there was an attempt to deify him, but ultimately I really feel the power of his personality was such that he didn't want people following him and deifying him. He wanted people to explore themselves and find the gold, find the riches, find the identity, find the will, find the energies within themselves to carry forth, and that we are all endowed with exactly the same things that he was endowed with. And there would I think he actually in words he resisted any people have claimed that that's his message, you know. He doesn't want followers. He wants people to do as he did, in the sense of, in my belief, fighting for freedom, bringing freedom to the world in whatever way you can. And that brings back something you said about blackpilling. I think there've been times where I've talked about the Black nobility, or I've talked about mind control and Tavistock, and some people have said, after I've said, hey, I've done all this research, I found these things, this is incredible, oh my God, and then they'll say, wow, now I feel like there's no hope at all. And I said, well, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to have that effect on you. I just think if you plan to change the world, you can't change a world that doesn't exist. You have to change the world as it is, take it as it is. And some things we find out are incredibly depressing, and they make us want to sit down and say, wow, I really either need to just give up or completely reevaluate what I was doing.
yeah,
And I think there are some people who intentionally blackpill. They're in a certain space
yes.
themselves psychologically, and they want everyone to just give up because somehow they think that would be easier.
I also think it's that misery loves company thing, and also a desire to be special and have the unique knowledge of how screwed everyone is, you know, and they're very depressed in their own lives. And I think I think part of the reason that blackpilling works is it works on people who haven't integrated their own shadow and haven't faced their own death. Because I'm sorry, viewer, but everyone watching this is going to die, and I am too, and so will Philip, and we're all mortal. The spirit is immortal, in my belief and my knowing, and we reincarnate. That's also my personal belief. You don't have to believe that. And by the way, I totally respect people who are Christian, and didn't mean to offend anyone. It's just my personal belief on that, and I realize it's a very touchy subject, but I believe that the most important part of Christianity is the behaving as Yeshua did. But you have to within yourself face that darkness, your own darkness, and accept it, and understand that it exists, those darker impulses. And then when you accept it, you don't indulge in it, right? Like an addict, nor do you repress it and deny it. And I think that a lot of the people who get very disheartened when they hear this information are usually people who have repressed it, or some amount of people who just, drink a lot or smoke a ton of weed or whatever they do, watch a lot of pornography, whatever they do to try and just, indulge in these darker impulses in order to just go, oh God, I don't have to think about how horrible the world is because I've had this big hit of dopamine or one of the other brain chemistry drugs, and so now I can actually be with myself, and I've released this tension and this anxiety that this information brings up. Part of the reason I'm able to deal with all this dark stuff is because I've done a lot of work to integrate my shadow. That wasn't always the case. When I first started on this journey 21 years ago, I had not integrated my shadow. I wasn't even aware a lot of it existed. It was so repressed and suppressed that I was like, I'm a good person, I'm a good person. And then I'd be really angry and irrational at times, because when you repress and suppress, it leaks out, or explodes out eventually, because it's like pushing a spring down. Whereas, and then I'd also do the indulgence, where I would indulge in things like smoking too much weed. Like, I used to have a pornography addiction. And so I would oscillate, I'd swing between these two. I would indulge and feel guilty, and then I'd repress it. I was also raised Catholic, so guilt was something I was all too familiar with and soaked in it. And so if you can work on your own shadow, you'll be less affected by this information. But in the meantime, take care of your body, take care of your psyche, and do things you can to do it. And I didn't mean for this preamble, but it's been an interesting conversation. Hopefully it's helpful to viewers. And I'm going to put a timestamp so people can maybe skip this part, because not everyone is interested.
Yeah, maybe.
Did you want to tie that up, Philip? Or we can maybe cut it and put it at the end too. I can edit it that way, possibly.
Well, first of all, I think what you're talking about is incredibly important in terms of moving forward. People do have to, as we move forward with this series, you're dealing with a lot of dark stuff that we will allude to at least, or get into. You're also dealing, in my view, with not the kind of conflict that people might be familiar with. We're looking ahead toward quite a different kind of conflict, and very complex. And ultimately, it will be I believe, on the spiritual level, although there will probably be, unfortunately, there will be other levels to it as well, but mostly spiritual and terribly complex. And ultimately, we must take responsibility for our own well-being, our own vibrational state, our own health, in order to be fit, in order to provide support to other people, in order to have the energy to move forward with the solutions. So I don't think we can dispense with your intro. I think these are really crucial things. If people don't want to hear it, they should hear it.
I'll put a at some point I'm going to take the time to put chapter markers in so people can skip, because some people, they're intellectuals or they're just not interested in this aspect of thing, and that's their own thing. But I agree with you, it is important. So I am going to leave it in. You're right, Philip. And I was talking about this with Walter Balsley when I had the conversation with him. Like, I always have, or try and have, some kind of plan, but I never stick to it, because I think things being organic and natural is actually more important in conversational. That's why I changed it from interviews to conversational series, also because, let's face it, viewers, if you watch enough of my videos, you're like, man, this guy should really let his guests get a word in edgewise. I do.
One reason I love your channel and your show is that it does feel like a conversation, and it feels like there's a greater purpose, rather than just, oh, I know about this, I'm on this show, and he knows about that, and making a product. This is not that. You've created something. You've created something that's definitely got great impetus, great integrity, and I'm very happy.
Thank you so much. And by the way, viewers, like, there's probably a good chance you watched the first video, but thanks to Philip's help and his research and just his presence, and I just love Philip's energy and the way his mind works. Our last video is probably the most popular video on my channel ever. I did have one with Laura Eisenhower that, due to her fame, plus the algorithm found it, or someone put it on a popular forum, or whatever happened, it had more views. But I feel like any organic show that grew on its own by word of mouth and whatever, the prior Black Nobility episode that I did with Philip is the most popular on my channel ever, by an increasingly large margin every day. And it seems almost like it's getting more popular. And so without further ado, I think that we've covered on some good stuff, and we'll circle back a little bit, although we kind of did the last part first with the population thing. We'll come back to that and show how that's a Venetian agenda, actually, specifically.
Okay.
And then Philip can touch on, I'm not familiar with the Greek origins, other than that's interesting about the Trojan War wanting to get rid of the hoi polloi. And it's important to note that that's actually a white pill. It seems like, oh no, the elites are always killing poor people. Well, yeah, I mean, read some history. Of course, that's the case. It's what wars is mostly killing poor people, especially in modern times. But
hey, they kill each other. They're certainly look how they go at each other. My God.
Yeah, and they've been pretty light hand for a long time with each other, and I think that era is about to come to a brutal end very, very shortly. I think that this building up together and alliances they've had for a long time was predicated to a large degree on the amount of secrecy they had. And as the secrecy goes away, and as the narrative starts to crumble, and as they face increasing setbacks, and they are facing setbacks, viewer, they really are. That's why they've turned the propaganda up to 11, is because they're losing control of that narrative. My friend Grant Eagles says that their glamour magic is no longer working.
Ah,
right. He's right, and that's part of what was creating the hypnosis. And you can kind of see that. I would say the best example of that is Hollywood. The level of distrust and dislike in Hollywood, and the collapse of Hollywood just in general. And the fact that these people are kind of like looking like the ghouls they are, instead of this glitterati, like beautiful, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and just your mind melts because Jennifer Lawrence is so hot, or Brad Pitt is so hot, or whatever, right? Like, that's starting to fail, and people are seeing like who these people are at a deeper level, which not always, but in many cases is pretty nasty and dark, because they're part of this whole system we're talking about. And so as that falls apart, I'm utterly convinced, and I think it's already happening, that the elites are starting to turn on each other. Now, the elites always try and keep that really quiet in modernity. They don't want us to know that they're anything other than this monolithic, unstoppable juggernaut. Because if we knew that they were factional and had lots of infighting, especially if there was any serious rifts, which there's at least one that I'm basically certain of, that would make them look more vulnerable to a popular uprising. They also have the tendency that when they sense a popular uprising is coming, they circle the wagons and have class solidarity until that moment of danger passes, and then they go back to their normal infighting and factional turf wars and whatnot. So I want to turn now, if you feel complete with that introduction, to what I am increasingly coming to believe is the single most important historical event prior to 2019, 2020, which I'm pretty sure you can figure what event I'm talking to there, but we're not trying to use that word because of the algorithms. We probably already set it off with our talk about climate stuff, but whatever. We'll just roll with that. Like, that isn't quite as heavily censored yet. And you know, I'm just going to get the truth out there for as long as I can. And by the way, also, if ever this channel disappears, I'm on BitChute as well with the same name. And I'm going to probably put an account on Rumble. It's a huge pain in the ass, guys, to like upload things to other channels. Like, BitChute has a much smaller amount of data you can put on a single video than YouTube. YouTube, you can put up a 10-hour video, for crying out loud. But BitChute, like, I had to split the last Black Nobility show that Philip and I did into two halves, which I did not have to do on YouTube. Plus, BitChute only accepts a very narrow number of formats. And so I've learned how to do it to where it'll work on both. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort to put them up in multiple places. And so if this channel ever does disappear, though, I'll be on BitChute. And if they block this channel somehow, I have 0 strikes, and I hope to keep it that way forever. But if for some reason that ever happens, you can find me on BitChute. You can find me on my main website, and I'll have links, which is whitelotuslight.com, and I'll have links to all of that stuff. So
I think Rumble's pretty good.
Yeah, Rumble's the other one that I'm gonna put on there as well. Put it on there as well. And there's another one that there's Odyssey, and then there's another one.
Right.
God, I keep hoping there's a viable competitor to Facebook at some point. I am so sick of Facebook. So,
yeah, go ahead.
Most important event of the past 1,000 years, in my opinion, other than what started in 2020, Fourth Crusade. So the Fourth Crusade happened in 1204 AD. But the lead up to the Fourth Crusade is really fascinating. And essentially, the first through third crusades were eventually beaten back, and eventually Saladin was able to rally the various different Muslim groups, and with the help of Egypt in particular, they were able to basically kick the Crusaders out by and large. And I forget exactly when the fall of Acre is. That's kind of like the final swan song of the Crusader states and so forth. At one point in time, there was what are called the Crusader states, or the basically they were European colonies in the Holy Land, but most of those were rolled back by the time of the Fourth Crusade. And so in 1198, Pope Innocent III called for a Fourth Crusade. The thing is that in order to transport the necessary amount of troops from Europe to the Holy Land, they had to rely on the shipbuilders of Italy. And there was three groups that could possibly handle that capacity, and that was the Genoans, the Pisans, as in the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and the Venetians. But at the time, Genoa and Pisa were in a costly war with one another. They're both on the west coast of the Italian peninsula, and that left only the Venetians as able to put forward a fleet able to carry a sufficient number of troops to the Holy Land. And so the target of that was going to be first Egypt. They wanted to go to Egypt because Saladin had really used supply lines coming from Alexandria and Cairo to basically do a war of attrition against the Crusaders and defeat them. Even if the Crusaders were beating them on a technical level, which is debatable, the supplies and reinforcements they were getting out of Egypt just overwhelmed the Crusaders during Saladin's like really stunning victories against the Crusaders. And so in 1201, Enrico Dandolo, the blind doge of Venice, he was in his 90s at the time, for crying out loud. It's debatable if he was actually blind, but he claimed to be blind. Mm-hmm. He was approached by 6 French knights on behalf of Pope Innocent III, and after extensive negotiations, the Venetians presented the Pope with their final offer. And I'm going to go ahead and just read you exactly what it says. And Joseph Burrell talks about this in his book, and huge credit for this episode. A lot of this episode is very directly inspired by this book. Get this book. If you're interested in going deep, it's fantastic. Dr. Joseph Burrell, in my opinion, a national treasure. I have nothing but esteem for him, but I want to read, this is actually from The City of Venice, or the City of Fortune, How Venice Ruled the Seas by Roger Crowley. This is what I'm going to read from. So here's what the Venetians said they would do, and I want you to listen carefully to some of the wording on this. They said, "We will build horse transports to carry 4,500 horses and 9,000 squires and 4,500 knights, and 20,000 foot soldiers will be embarked on ships. And our terms will include provisions for both men and horses for 9 months. This is the minimum we will provide, conditional on payment of 4 marks per horse and 2 per man. And all the terms we are setting out for you will be valid for a year from the day of departure from the port of Venice to serve God and Christendom, wherever that may take us. The sum of money specified above totals 94,000 marks, which is I believe that's in gold. That was an insane amount of money in those days. That would be equivalent of probably hundreds of millions or perhaps billions nowadays. And we will additionally supply 50 armed galleries free of charge for as long as our alliance lasts, with the condition that we receive half of all the conquests that we make, either by way of territory or money, either by land or at sea. Now take counsel among yourselves as to whether you're willing to go ahead with this." So the Byzantine Empire, I believe it was called at that time, or I guess it would be the Eastern Roman Empire at that time, because by this point it was Constantinople. It was post, right? So it's Constantinople. It was, if you look at where it's situated on a map, you can see that Byzantium, Constantinople, and nowadays Istanbul, not Constantinople. I'll never get over that joke that they might be giants. But it's right there on the Bosphorus Strait that has the Black Sea then entering into the Mediterranean. It's incredibly important from a geostrategic point of view. The geography of it is critical, much like if you look at the geography of Italy, you see exactly why Italy came to dominate. So if you look here on this handy dandy globe, you can see that that is the Bosphorus Strait. And all of Asia, all the trade from Asia, you know, all the way from China, would come over. And it come over to the Black Sea and then go on ships and it would embark. And then if you wanted to get out of the Black Sea on a ship, you had to pay the Empire of Byzantium or Constantinople or eventually Istanbul. You had to pay them their cut as middlemen. And so like all the spice trading, the silk, the old Silk Road, all of that flowed naturally through in the context of the time we're talking, around the 1200s, Constantinople. And so Venice had already at one point gotten something called the Golden something or other. I forget exactly what it was, but something like the Golden Bowl, I think it was called, which was an agreement with Constantinople that they could have tax-free trading privileges with Constantinople, which made them fantastically wealthy, because then they could do trade with the entirety of the Middle East. They could do trade with the incredibly coveted and valuable spice and silks from the East. They basically just were doing really well. And they even let the Venetians build a little enclave along the port part of Constantinople. As the Venetians grew more powerful by around the time of the 1200s, because that Golden Bowl was much earlier, Constantinople was starting to realize, the Eastern Roman Empire was starting to realize that the Venetians were getting out of hand, and also their power was waning. They were starting to be attacked by Muslims and Turkic or people from basically the steppes of Asia kept attacking them. Barbarians were attacking them, so forth. And it was just costing them a lot of money to just sort of maintain their presence even. And plus they'd become very decadent and corrupt. I mean, even by the time of Byzantium, that's where the term Byzantine comes from, the complexity of all the court intrigues. So they decided to allow Genoa in particular, but also I believe Pisa, to also have enclaves there and also have that tax exempt status, which was then really helpful to the Genoans and the Pisans. And they were trying to play the Venetians off one another, or the Italians off one another. And so the Venetians told the Knights that we're going to go down and we're going to attack Egypt, right? But you'll notice nowhere in that agreement does it specify that they're going to go to Egypt or even Palestine. Interesting. It says wherever it may take us. And they are the ones who control the boats and also the payment of the soldiers, both very important to motivating the soldiers and also moving them where you want. So they at the same time went to the viceroy of Egypt, to the Sultan's viceroy, and they said, who knows what concessions they got, but they got some kind of concessions or money or whatever. They told the Egyptians, we're not going to attack you. Now, I'm not going to go into it in depth in this one, but it's very possible that since those knights were French knights, and it was the 1200s, and they were sent by the Pope, and based on the first reports after the Fourth Crusade coming out to the Pope were absolutely through a Templar, that there was a Templar hand in this. But the Templar hand is very hidden, whereas the Venetian and Teutonic Knight hand is quite clear. So the Venetians around this time, they made fake well, I mean, they were made of the actual metal of gold or silver, but the hyperperon, it was called. It was sort of the US dollar or the British pound or the French guilder or the Spanish, I forget what the Spanish coin was when it was the world reserve currency, but essentially the hyperperon was the global currency at the time. It was the currency of Constantinople. It was the gold standard at the time, quite literally. And they minted fake ones of that. So it looked exactly like them in very large quantity. Now, in modern history, there's many times where when you're attacking a country, you will print, if you're the attacking country, you'll print fake money of that kind. For example, when there was the 1958 coup d'etat in Iran, that was done by Kermit Roosevelt from, yes, that Roosevelt dynastic family of the US. Directed by
MI6.
Directed by MI6. It was the MI6 and CIA collaboration, and MI6 was already deep in there. The British were already in there. It was British oil companies that the CIA intervened on behalf of. Philip's absolutely right. But Kermit Roosevelt, one of the main things they did is they set up printing presses there, and they printed up a bunch of the Iranian currency. And the reason they do this is because then you can flood and bribe, and you can depreciate the currency, which is a super great way to attack a country, is to depreciate that country's currency, cause inflation that gets the natives get restless, the regular people get angry. Go ahead, Philip.
Were you aware of the genocide that occurred in Iran I think it was 1918, 1919?
No.
The British using all kinds of things, biological weapons,
Wow.
starvation, all the dirty tricks. They carried out a genocide between 8 to 10 million Iranians.
That's incredible. I've never heard that before.
And what was stunning to me was that my friend just sent me something about this 2 months ago, and I was shocked for hours. I was in a stupor because how could I have not known that?
Yeah, I didn't know it, and I feel like I'm fairly knowledgeable, so I've never heard.
I'll track down more sources and send to you, because I felt like the biggest dupe. Like, my God, I thought I knew pretty much anything of that magnitude, and somehow how do they hide something like that?
That's got to be like at least a quarter or a third of the population of that country.
Mm-hmm.
in those days. That's incredible. Yeah, no, I didn't know that, and that's I'll have to look into that more. I'll take your word for it. I don't know that from my own research, but I trust Philip's integrity and accuracy on that, even though I've never heard that. That's stunning. It's interesting. That's very close timeline wise to the Armenian genocide. See, now make sure we really piss everyone off, right? As always, Philip, our goal is to alienate as many powers that be as possible by just telling the truth.
But you know what? We're gonna sweep in some people who are really dedicated to truth.
That's right.
And are willing to take their lumps when it comes to giving up some old beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
It hurts for 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you have integrity, I mean, that's the thing, is you have to allow for new information that is of a superior quality and fits the facts better than old information. You have to be willing to update it. And if you don't, you become one of these people like, there's yet more evidence that Clovis first in anthropology is not true. They just found some mammoth bones with like cuts in them and whatever. And there's still people defending Clovis people first, even though it's pretty clear to me the Americas populated for like 37,000 years ago. And those people are still Native American, so it's not, it's not, they are the people who became Native Americans, and like we know, they came over from Asia or whatever, it's just the reason people are defending it is because people have tenure and career built on that false belief. They've written books on that false belief. And same thing with the hunted the mammoths to extinction thing. And I'm using this because this is a very neutral, non-contentious example in terms of, if you're not in anthropology or archaeology, what I'm saying isn't, you're going to be like, who cares? Oh, people who have written books on it sure care. People who got their tenureship sure care and will defend it to the death, even though the evidence mounts that it's wrong. And that's just how, thank you there, good lad. My lad just brought me a drink.
Well, it's incredible the way they...
Oh, go ahead.
The mind control, of course, that they have complete control of the university system all over the world, which is why it's absolutely verboten to say anything negative about Charles Darwin or lots of other topics. There's a party line, there's an orthodoxy, and you don't deviate from it. That's why
Einstein is another good example.
One of the things we have to look forward to is to recreate, to remake, to reinvent the educational system such that people are directed to be guided toward the light of truth, rather than simply satisfying adherence to whatever orthodoxy is in power. And that it's absolutely vital. So that's one of the ways we can struggle. You don't have to pick up a gun. You can fight for truth. There are other ways of doing these things. So
yeah. So circling back to the Fourth Crusade. So they get that agreement with the Pope, and possibly these are Templar, unknown. We do know that Teutonic Knights came down from Swabia. and joined the Fourth Crusade. And there's reason for that, which I'm going to go into now. So rather than go to Egypt, the first place the Venetians went, and the Pope caught wind of this and said they'd be excommunicated if they did it, and he actually excommunicated them for doing this, which is an amazing all-in move by the Venetians. And Enrico Dandolo, say what you want about the Black Nobility, these people aren't stupid.
Oh no.
They're genius. Like the Fourth Crusade, the machinations of Enrico Dandolo is legendary. Like if you know,
I will say that sort of craftiness has kind of fallen off from what I've heard.
Yeah,
they're coasting on the still very redolent fumes of the original genius, right?
And the trillions stacked behind them, I think, also helps a lot. But yeah, the inbreeding, I think, has weakened them. That's why if some hot rogue Black Nobility woman is, you know, wanting to take humanity in a better direction and reinvigorate the line, she can give me a call. must be attractive and, you know, worth a couple billion. I'm just kidding. Maybe. Anyways,
be careful what you wish for.
No. Yeah, only if wouldn't be involved in something that gets me killed or forces me to not be who I am or harms my family in any way. So let me just clarify all that. So obviously the odds of all this are zero. So anyways, joking aside, so their first target was the modern day Croatian city of Zara across the Adriatic Sea. And Venice had been having problems. It was Zara in those days, and it wasn't Croatian per se, but it's directly across the Adriatic Sea, which is kind of that inlet between the Italian isthmus there and the peninsula and the Croatian side across the Adriatic. And so Zara, modern Zarda in Croatia, was a rival port there. And whereas Genoa and Pisa are fighting on the other side of the Italian peninsula, Venice's only real competitor on that side of the Italian peninsula at that time was Zarda, or Zara is what it was called in that days. So they went over there and they sacked Zara, even though it's Christian. And the Pope said, if you do that, you'll be excommunicated. So they sacked it. Pope excommunicated them. But Enrico Dandolo was not done, not by a long shot. He probably even knew this. This is just like next level genius. So Philip of the First or Second or something like that of Swabia up in Germany, southern Germany, he was hosting Alexius Angelus, who was the cousin, I believe, of Emperor Alexius III, also Alexius Angelus. They had the same name. And the emperor's brother, who was the father of this person, Alexius Angelus, that the King Philip of Swabia was hosting, his father had been deposed by his brother and kicked out. And then he became emperor of Constantinople. So Philip of Swabia wanted to back this Alexius Angelus, who had a viable claim to the throne of Constantinople for his own reasons. And I believe this is how the Teutonic Knights come into the equation, right? And then also the blind doge could be like, oh, Constantinople, I never thought about going there, but now that you mention it for a proper fee and certain considerations and concessions, yeah, we could go there. No, he was planning on going there all along. So they then go from Zara, and they make some stops in Greece and whatnot, but they eventually make their way, and by 1204, they make their way to Constantinople and they sack it. And it seems to me that there were three factions, or even there was a fourth faction, sort of, that was already there, but three factions who were part of this sacking. One of them's very contentious and is interesting from personal note, because as I've said before, I'm a Knights Templar. It's very different, the modern organization, from the 1200s Knights Templar. The one I'm involved in, it's about personal development and esoteric stuff. And there is Gnosticism. I mean, that spiritual core is kind of the same, but the level of like transnational stuff is not anywhere near the way it was back then. There are some Templar organizations that perhaps are still that way, but mine is pretty humble, you know, compared to that sort of thing, to put it mildly. But it appears the Templar were there. based on, there's some evidence that the ships had Templar red cross on a white field on the sails. The first report back to the Pope was by a Templar. The treasures that were brought to the Pope, they were directed to give some amount of these treasures to the Templar. So it's circumstantial, but it seems the Templar were involved to some degree. I'm of the opinion that the Templar were, they're Gnostic, they're Hermetic, but under an umbrella term that does not necessarily mean worship of this deity. But I believe that the sort of thread among the Templar and part of the Masonic groups, right, which some of them are very bad. There's some bad Masons, absolutely. Masons may be prevented from saying this, but I am not a Freemason, so I can speak freely of my opinion of this. I believe that there are, of course, some corrupt Masons, and it's not just limited to just the P2 Lodge, a one-off event. I believe there's absolutely corrupted Masonic people, and I believe that this dates back to infiltration by the Illuminati and Adam Weishaupt. I mean the real one, the historical one that arose in Bavaria in Germany in the 1700s, in the 18th century, by Adam Weishaupt, who was an ex-Jesuit and set up a structure identical to the Jesuits, which allows for compartmentalization to a huge degree. Based on John Robinson's book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, I believe, and I might go into this in more depth later, my opinions on the Masons, and just, sure. I don't want to hurt any of the people I know who are Masons who are good. I know some Masons who, like, I pretty much trust them with my life. They're that good. I also know some Masons that I wouldn't trust at all, that I know personally or one step removed. I don't trust these people, and they happen to be Masons. So people who try and make them monolithically evil, or, oh, they're so wonderful and good, and my apologies to people I love who say those kind of things, but they have their own reasons for why they have to be careful saying that stuff, because they're Masons themselves. I just believe that it's a vast organization, and there's clear stuff that's good that's come out of Masonry. For example, the ending of slavery in Europe was absolutely a Masonic thing. The Enlightenment was absolutely a Masonic thing, which I think has been very positive. I would say the advancement of the scientific method is a Masonic thing. And I would say that the Renaissance is, to a large degree, a legacy of Templarism, in part because of the Fourth Crusade. And so with that aside, I believe, my personal belief, and I can't prove this, is that the Templar went in to get certain information and vouchsafe it for their own purposes, which are very different from what the Teutonic Knights, and especially the Venetians, wanted to do. But the Teutonic Knights and the Venetians, absolutely, without question, went in and they made a beeline for the Imperial Archives, for the Imperial Library. And the Imperial Library was, among other things, a repository of information that had been taken out of the Library of Alexandria. I believe that the attacking and sacking of the Library of Alexandria was a similar grab of ancient knowledge, and that during the burning of it, I think, not all, of course, we lost some stuff forever, but I think a lot of the most important stuff that was held there was spirited out by various different factions who caught wind of it. And history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And the sacking of the Library of Alexandria and burning of it, it's often just described as a burning. I don't think so. I believe it was sacked specifically for knowledge that was there.
So the burning could have been under cover of arson. They spirited these materials out of there. Very interesting. I've never heard that. I'm relieved to hear that.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
very interesting.
some stuff was absolutely lost forever. Like, I think we've lost Plato's comedies forever, for example. I mean, maybe they're out there, but I feel like those would have been leaked by now. I think more like critical information got out of there. Among other things were maps. If you want to see what the Teutonic Knights grabbed, watch my episode with Walter Bosley. And he has a whole elaborate theory that feels intuitively correct to me with claircognizance, and I believe he's correct. That has to deal with antediluvian technology, schematics perhaps even, that was spirited away by the Teutonic Knight faction. But I believe that the Venetians and the Templar were probably looking for certain Hermetic texts as well. Again, totally speculative. I have no proof of that. The Teutonic Knights thing is kind of speculative, but I leave that to Walter Bosley and his expertise. So watch that interview if you're curious. The Venetian one, to me, is a lot less speculative. Still speculative because we don't actually really know. We do know that there was a sacking of the library. That is beyond question. We do know, it seems, that information was taken out of there. And the reason that I think that I can say with reasoned speculation, near certainty that that's true, is because of the emergence of certain medieval portolans and maps, the most famous of which is not even medieval so much as like, I think even during the Enlightenment, I forget exactly when, but it's the most famous is the Piri-Reis map. And the Piri-Reis map, Admiral Piri-Reis of Istanbul, not Constantinople, he said was derived from a variety of maps they had there in the Imperial Archive. So these were maps that presumably were not taken during the sacking of Constantinople. So even with the targeted groups of knights, they probably, and the Venetians agents, they had to go in there and grab this information in a targeted way, and they probably had some kind of time constraints. I think a modern day example of this sort of thing is the sacking of the Baghdad Museum.
Yeah.
And all the Sumerian cylinder seals. That
Absolutely.
and in fact, there's one that just happened that's super current, which is the Russian sacking of certain Ukrainian museums to take specifically Scythian artifacts. And I hope to go into the Scythian thing later.
Yeah.
The Scythians are huge, and that's for another thing. I just wanted to give some modern examples of, again, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And so even in modernity, these things happen. The elites understand the power of this hidden information. And that's part of the reason they go, oh, civilization's just 8,000 years old. Oh, Göbekli Tepe, that's just some hunter-gatherers who made this really elaborate astronomical calendar. And oh, yeah, the Great Pyramid's only 5,000 years old, and the Sphinx is only 5,000 years old. No, absolutely not. Lies. There was no prior civilizations. Sure, there's that 325,000-year-old Moroccan jawbone or the Homo sapiens, but we only stopped doing hunter-gatherer stuff in the past like 8,000 years, which is 0.03%. No, that's lies. And the reason the elites lie about that is because they know all this stuff. And whenever they get this information, they go out of their way to go find these ancient structures and these ancient ruins and so forth and pieces of information because they're looking for stuff. And what they're looking for is ancient technology and certain other pieces of information that are related to, I think, our solar system is that's the stuff that the modern people are looking for, stuff that relates to our solar system, our ancient technology, and I also think magical systems. And that's what I think was happening with those Scythian artifacts recently. And those Sumerian texts could be all of the above, actually, that were looted from the Baghdad Museum, including a lot that had never been translated, cuneiform tablets, because not a lot of people speak cuneiform. It's, was a dead language that was resurrected. So likewise, they went in there and they seem to have grabbed these maps. And there's certain medieval portolans that show that are just like staggeringly accurate. And if it wasn't for Eratosthenes, when he judged the circumference of the earth, he made some kind of error. And if it wasn't for that, a lot of these medieval maps would be like perfectly precise, within 1% or less of variation from modern satellite-driven cartography. So there's a lot of evidence that the Venetians discovered in those maps and suppressed the information of the New World. Why would they do that? Why wouldn't they just go loot the New World themselves? The reason is, again, geographic. Recall, Venice is on the northeastern side. They're not even really almost even on the peninsula anymore. They're just up there in the Adriatic, but they're on the eastern side of the Italian peninsula. Genoa and Pisa, their great rivals, especially Genoa, is on the western side. They don't have to go sailing all the way around. So Genoa, if the information of the New World were to come out, Genoa would have first mover status. Plus, you then have Spain, and at that point in time, it was on the Iberian Peninsula over in Spain was the Caliphate. I forget what it's called, but it was Muslim occupied at this point in time. And so there was a lot of geological things that would have made it difficult. And Venice had a pretty tight grip by, especially the 1200s on the Mediterranean. They weren't, exclusive, but they were pretty dominant. As we'll go into in a little bit, they were able to even crush rivals in Florence and elsewhere through all manner of manipulation and so forth. So it appears that the Venetians grabbed, in particular, maps, probably other stuff as well, but they grabbed maps. Now, I alluded earlier to, there was a fourth group. The fourth group were Neo-Platonic humanists, who were Greeks. And they, it seems, got stuff out of those archives as well, catching wind of that the Venetians were coming over and sacking it, or perhaps even as the sacking began, they went and they grabbed certain texts right away and hid them, sacred texts, actually. And so, there was a thought that floated through my head that I wanted to touch on. The Templar, and this is open source now, so I can talk about this. Timothy Hogan talks about it. The Templar were actually not founded when it's commonly believed. They were founded about 7 years before that. They were founded in the late 1090s, where? Constantinople. That's where they were founded. I believe the Templar probably already were familiar with a lot of these texts, these sacred texts, and they probably knew what they wanted to grab right away under the cover of this thing. And I believe that the Templar worked, and this isn't to say the Templar weren't corrupt at different points. It seems they definitely were, some amount of them. I think some amount of them were also good all the way even up to the end. I believe that they were a mixed organization because they were so vast and sprawling and powerful that, of course, it's going to attract corruptible people, and people are trying to be in it for themselves. But I believe that the inner order of the Templar was the Templar were founded to go find antediluvian antiquities, and they got their charter, according to Timothy Hogan, the Templar Grand Master. They got a charter from an unknown mystery school that is not identified on the Giza Plateau, the Tauru. They were given a charter to go look for certain things. And the first place they went was they dug up the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and recovered, nobody really knows, something. One thing we do know that's been, again, according to Timothy Hogan, is released is a copy of the Zohar. And what's interesting is the Zohar refers to 7 continents. So does the Peri-Reyes map. The Peri-Reyes map has Antarctica. But this is really weird. The Peri-Reyes map of Antarctica shows Antarctica without ice. And how can that be? That would say that this map would have to be truly phenomenally ancient, prior to even the last ice age. I don't know when the last pole shift happened. There's a theory that when the poles shift, that the reason that there's the Arctic and the Antarctic is because of the poles, and that the toroidal field of the Earth's magnetosphere pushes out the coldness of space, and that at the Arctic and Antarctic, where that toroidal field bends in on itself, that some amount of coldness of space comes down, and that's why there's constantly ice in those locations. And actually, we're in the middle of the poles shifting right now. They're moving at actually an extraordinary fast rate. Like I can't remember how much, but I want to say miles a year. I did an interview that hasn't gone up yet. It'll have gone up by the time the viewers see this, with Peter Champu, the geomancer, and we talk about that a bit more. And so you can look into that. But that's that whole thing where they found that frozen mammoth with like a fresh flower in its mouth, which doesn't make any sense in Siberia. Like they couldn't have been grazing and then just fell over in a bank of snow. There wouldn't have been flowers. But something happened that caused this mammoth to flash freeze. And one of the theories is out there is that there was a pole shift. And so that might explain that Antarctica might have been free of ice much more recently than we commonly think. And hence, like, it could have been within the last, say, 15 or 20,000 years that this map that Peri-Reyes was, he apparently was copying from multiple different maps, but he maps Antarctica free of ice, like that we only know with modern, like, radar. So, and that's interesting because, again, you have these two ancient sources, the Zohar, which according to Timothy Hogan was dug up in the Temple Mount by the Templar and then brought over and translated by a Sephardic Jewish person on the Iberian Peninsula, a rabbi there, and the Templar just wanted a copy of it in exchange. And people try and say that that's the origin of the Zohar. According to Timothy Hogan, no, it's much more ancient than that. And it's antediluvian even, like from prior to the flood. But so the Templar were supposed to go around and grab all these pre-flood antiquities, what he calls the primordial tradition. And he has a whole book called The Way of the Templar where he talks about this openly, and he has a number of other books where he talks about it. And so, again, I don't know what the Templar were doing in the Fourth Crusade. That's the most hidden part of this. It's the part we don't have any information. But what those Neo-Platonists, the Greeks, did was they apparently took a copy of the Hermetica. And that copy of the Hermetica then reappears much, much, much later in 1438 to 1445. There was the Council of Ferrara, Florence. I'm reading now from Financial Vipers of Venice. I'm not going to read directly all of it. I'm just, that's my source here. And he in turn cites, it looks like I'm not sure who he's citing here. Well, it doesn't matter. Oh, probably The Secret History of Hermes Trismegistus by Ebeling. But apparently between 1438 and 1445 in Florence, they had the Council of Ferrara, Florence, and it was to reunify the Greek and Latin churches that had split in 1054. That's what they said.
Oh.
However, the Medicis had been having a man named Ficino translate Plato's works, and he was in the middle of them. And then in 1460 or thereabouts, one of Cosimo Medici, who I think the world owes a great, great, great debt of gratitude to,
I agree.
he had them. He told Ficino, "No more Plato. Put that off to the side. That's no longer the priority. The priority is I have a copy of the Corpus Hermeticum." And he seems to have got it from these men named these prominent Byzantine humanists, although that's odd to use the word Byzantine here, but basically they were Greeks, and they were named Bessarion and Plethon. And it looks like Cosimo Medici did some kind of negotiation with them and got a copy of the Hermetica. And it was eventually finally completed in 1463, a year before Cosimo's death. I don't know how old Cosimo was when he died, but I think he might have been. He might have been killed by the Venetians, and there's a reason for it. And go into that book. There's a cosmological reason for why the Venetians and the church both. Of course, the church would be threatened by the Hermetica, but the reason the church was threatened by the Hermetica is because it predated a lot of their information, and therefore it was an older, more original source. And therefore, that was scary because that undermined their authority as like they have the oldest thing. We go back to, Jesus and Moses and all this stuff. We're very ancient, and because we're so old, we are the closer to the source or whatever. Well, the Hermetica was much, much, much older still. In fact, it seems that it goes back at least to ancient Egypt and probably an antediluvian source, I would say. Like the Hermetica, I think, comes from the figure from pre-dynastic Egypt that we know as Thoth, which some people call Thoth the Atlantean. And then later Thoth becomes Hermes, and it becomes Hermes the Thrice-Born or Hermes Trismegistus. And the Hermetica comes from that, the Corpus Hermeticum. But I'm not going to belabor this point, and Joseph states it in a way that's understandable. It's a very complicated thing, but if you want to look into Joseph Farrell's work on the topological metaphor of the medium, but essentially it creates this argument between that there's infinite fecundity in the universe and on the earth by extension. There's infinite creativity, right? Everything stems, we're made in the image of the creator, so we can create, and that creates an open system. And it creates something other than a zero-sum game. And the zero-sum game is very much, and I mean, it is true that our economics to a certain degree are a zero-sum game, or whenever we have a breakout in technology, that can be challenged. And then it goes back quickly into a zero-sum game as the controllers of the world quickly ratchet things back down so they can get control.
Yeah, it's these parallel outlooks, you know, is a closed system or open system, these two mentalities that we've talked about. This is just a different way of talking about that, but yeah, this is really great stuff.
And I think that those two mentalities, the way they manifest in the elites, especially these Italian elites, and by the way, I want to take responsibility for, I've learned a lot since the last episode, and I think I was a little too glib with calling too much of European royalty the Black Nobility and not dialing it in on a fine enough distinction of the Venetians, because there's a huge difference, in my opinion. There's a significant difference between the Venetians and the Genoans, but they're kind of similar in a lot of ways. But there's a massive difference between the Venetians and the Florentines, especially post Cosimo Medici, who, again, going back to that earlier thing I said, there appears to be a tension. There's a working together and a tension between these Molochians, from a spiritual point of view, and the Luciferians. There's also, of course, people who are like trying to move back towards the Most High, and the occasional like people who are like really uplifting, like good people that even exist even among these powerful groups. Like, it does happen, but by and large, just because of the era we live in, that group is very weak when compared to the Molochians, who are ultra powerful until 2025, and the Luciferian or Promethean group. And the biggest difference is the Luciferians, they're not afraid to be ruthless. They're also not afraid to be good. They're kind of neutral-ish. And when I say neutral, I don't mean like Switzerland, like they don't get involved, although Switzerland also gets involved. But I don't mean like they stand there and just don't get involved and maintain neutrality. What I mean is they're willing to use different methods as circumstances require, which can have extreme brutality and ruthlessness, these Luciferians, or they can be more like uplifting and kind of helpful. And they're more towards the spiritualizing of humanity, and they have more of this belief in the fecundity and the fact that they're made in the image of the Creator, and free will and self-determination. They're kind of more libertarian, sort of, if you will, but they're more they basically just believe that a better method of rule is to give people more self-determination up to a point, because they still want to be in control, because they believe that allows this natural fecundity and natural creativity of humanity to advance things, which, of course, being at the top, they benefit from the most. Now, the risk of that, of course, is that you might have a revolutionary force arise within that. But that's a risk that these Luciferians are willing to take, because they believe that the advancement is more rapid. The Molochian,
there's also a sense of confidence. Like I think when you talk about Medici and what Florence represented, and certainly we know, I have to find the source, but we know that there were Venetian intelligence operations deployed against what was happening in Florence, and brought down and destroyed the Renaissance, because it was such a threat. But I'm thinking, you know, you can imagine an aristocrat saying, "I just love the world. I love all these things people create, and it makes such a wonderful thing. And I love to walk in the city and see these beautiful things and feel the spirit." And you could see someone on a very dark path of only thinking about trying to sort of megalomaniacal, controlling, wanting to use fear and intimidation to keep what they have. And you could see how there would be room in some of these noble families and in some of these royals to be on either side of this philosophy. You can't really be both, as you said, you know. You're one or the other. It's time to choose. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And what I was just going to say is the contrast of the Molochian view is just like Philip said, it's much more fear-based in every sense of the word. It doesn't have that confidence of I'll be able to stay on top because I'm clever and intelligent, because the Luciferian energy is very intelligence, and it's kind of rationality, and it's very much personified in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Those were very Luciferian impulses, or the founding of the United States. Molochians tend to be reactionary and always top down and clamping down, and they want slavery. They like slavery. Slavery is kind of their favorite thing, is to have total control, because they're very fear oriented and they're very materialistic and mechanistic. Philip talked about that in part 1. Do you want to just chime in on this philosophical difference between Venice and Florence? You touched on it in part 1, and like I think this is a perfect place for you to shine here a little bit of light on that. I forget exactly what you said, but it's sort of like this mechanistic, humans are machines, versus no, we're in the image of the creator.
Well, you're certainly seeing this happening now with these goons and ghouls, the goons and the ghouls out of the World Economic Forum, preaching this rhetoric that's trying to pass itself off as somehow fact.
Right.
We are hackable animals. We don't have souls. That this idea that humans are mysterious is long past. We can, we can control people with vibrations, frequencies. We can make artificial food, and then we're able to determine how people physically feel, the amount of nutrition they get. Right.
True.
The idea that, again, to me, like in my own meditation, or I'm coming to this greater and greater certainty about how we are unlimited, truly. And if someone can hypnotize you and convince you that you're a hackable animal and there's nothing more to look forward to than that, and you should own nothing and be happy and be a slave, and then voluntarily euthanize yourself when the time comes, and then, this is being opposed by people who are saying, wait a minute, like myself, for instance, I don't see any evidence that when it fuses with these ideas of British empiricism, that we can only know what we know through our 5 senses, and there's nothing more than that, and that consciousness is a kind of biological illusion that arises in biological machines. I think that's, I don't see my personal, this is what I'm struggling toward, to be able to articulate this or prove it, but I don't see any evidence that this is true. And physicists are saying that consciousness that does not arise from a certain level of chemical complexity. Consciousness was here first and created out of that, and that's the fecundity, or it calls to mind, and when you consider it, this unlimited fecundity that we can tap into if we're not hypnotized. And even then, at some point, human consciousness will break out of these. It's just a matter of when. You can try to pretend that consciousness is something that you can simulate with artificial intelligence and that it's mechanistic, but at some point, the truth of it's going to break out, and it's going to be so enormous, it's going to sweep all of this aside. You allude to a certain time frame, which I think is quite interesting, but I'm feeling it also 2025, 2030, because I feel it's all very close, this realization. But I'm going off a little bit. Let's stay on track. We'll try to keep this.
Well, no, I think that was fantastic what you said. And so that kind of encapsulates that sort of that tension that I believe has been among the elites since no later than this 1460s period. And I think it probably goes back much further. I think the Templars recognized that they were in a period of time in which this Molochian force was, or sometimes, Steiner called it, I think it's not quite the same thing, the Ahrimanic force. I think that they're similar, but slightly different. I think that they're interrelated. I think the materialist aspect of the Molochians, I think that the Ahrimanic force of materialization is an ally of the Molochian energy, but I think that the Molochians have more of a certain cunning to them that is a little bit different flavor from what Steiner talks about with the Ahrimanic force, but they're kind of similar. It could even be that it's talking about the same force. I just like the term Moloch because of the way it ties into traditions of the worship of that being seems to really be common among these horrible, nasty elites. They seem to really, the harm of children is like the big tip off to me, and the sacrifice of children and the Epstein harm of children, and using that for blackmail.
It's apparent. I don't want to cut in
Oh, no,
again,
go ahead, go ahead.
one of the things that we will get to, there are numerous, that's putting it mildly, allegations of exactly what you described: human sacrifice, child sacrifice,
Harm of children,
cannibalism,
yeah,
pedivores,ism,
yeah,
and as I said in our little talk before we started, how I feel hesitant in putting names to these allegations, because I don't think that's right until I've sorted things through or have other corroborating evidence to even bring up names relative to these allegations. But it's horrible to consider, but unfortunately we're at a point where we need to start considering it.
I agree.
And not today, but we will. And
that might have to be a BitChute only episode, but yeah, we can touch on that at some point. It's really dark, and I think like touching it in broad strokes about how it's used as to blackmail people, that people when they reach a certain level of power, if they want to get into the inner circles of the Molochians, they have to engage in this and then be filmed, and then that's.
But even those at the top are apparently engaging in it, because it, to me, if you are introduced to something as a child and it becomes an intergenerational problem, then it becomes something that almost gets encoded almost at the genetic level. I say almost because I know there's no science to this, but if you think about if your family was engaging in something so extreme for centuries, it would become such a part of you. You would it would be hard to not do it. But certainly those things seem to be going on, and so it's incumbent upon us to be brighter than the dark is dark.
Right.
Exactly. And I think that seems to be the direction that we're going with this. How do you know how much light to generate if you don't know how dark the dark is? And that's how I would answer the whole black pill thing. Like, we do need to uncover it all, but we have to ultimately prevail in being sources of light.
I agree. Yeah, it's that Mandela truth and reconciliation model. I think at some point will have to be used. You know,
I have ideas not like that, but different ideas.
I do think though that I do think that the Luciferians are about to turn in the corner on the Molochians, and that when they do, I don't think they're going to be as friendly as you or I might be. I think they'll be more like frontier justicey about this whole thing. Also, in the interest of them consolidating power, I think that they'll get rid of these people. I think they're being set up for it, actually. I think the Luciferians have kind of tricked the Molochians into overextending, and then they're going to pull the rug out from under them and have popular support, and then
that would
take over in that way. This is my working theory based on what the angels have told me, that the Bronze and Silver Age is ruled by Lucifer and the Golden Age is ruled by the Most High, that the angels answer to, which is not Yahweh or Jehovah. People aren't going to want to hear that. I don't care. Yahweh and Jehovah are usurper gods that are not. It's not who the angels work for. I mean, the angels told me this themselves, and it makes perfect sense to me, because the angels, they will strike down with a furious vengeance upon certain groups. They will do that, although they can't right now because of the age we're in. But they are not. They're just. They're nothing like. They're like the Old Testament in certain ways, some of their values, and then they're like the New Testament in certain ways and some of their values. They're basically like always striving for being in accordance with natural law and harmony, and trying to increase harmony, and they want to bring about the Golden Age. And they understand that part of that evolution is to move from this ultra dark Molochian system, or satanic system, if you want to call it that, towards there will be a period of time where there's sort of a false light, so to speak, of the Luciferian in the Bronze and Silver Age. And during the Bronze Age, the Luciferians will be a bit darker, and during the Silver Age, they'll be a bit lighter. And eventually, just the Most High takes over for the Golden Ages, and that's how it works. And we've lost the name of that being. You know, that's the name that the Jews are looking for, the name of God that's been lost, you know, or the lost word of the Masons. It's the same thing, in my opinion. So that is the direction that things are moving in. And so things will be getting better because in 2025 is when 2025 to 2028 seems to be when the Luciferians will pull the rug out from under the Molochians. 28 to 2030 will be kind of like justice being done. 2030 will be when the Luciferians start to, like, you know, recreate a global civilization from what they're able to do with whatever's left. And also there'll be certain mystery schools and so forth will come out, and a lot of technology that's currently hidden will be brought out. And you know, one thing that all these different beings agree on is this time was always going to be a bottleneck. I've been seeing visions of that for like 20 years. You know, and that's this whole depopulation thing. And I will say, I can't reveal my sources on this, but the Luciferian side had planned of there being that, since there had to be this bottleneck or culling, depopulation, they wanted to preserve the best and the brightest. They wanted to preserve the artists and the scientists and the genius and the highest quality people in a sort of true eugenical idea of, you know, eugenics, where they were trying to preserve the best and the brightest. And the Molochians said, no, kill them all. Kill as many as you can. We want control. And the Molochians being dominant, that's what's happening. It's very haphazard and disgusting and broad-based genocide.
Yeah, it's horrific and sloppy and offensive on every level.
And it seems like the Luciferians maybe have managed to do some level of preservation. So, like, you know, that's the saline in some of the injections, perhaps. I just think that, like, they haven't been able to do, I've been told by the angels and so forth, they haven't been able to stop it as much as, that's why we have to put a stop to it as soon as possible. And I think viewers all know what I'm talking about. And if you've had it, there's things you can do. You can look up, well, I have to be careful, but there's information up there about what you can do to remediate. And I'm told that in the future, full remediation will be possible. The angels have told me that. We'll see. But there's things you can do. Just don't take any more. Don't take any more. If you've taken any of them, don't take any more. I can't emphasize that enough. And for the love of God, do not give them to girls, especially. Don't give them to boys either. But my God, we're going to need young women who are fertile to help repopulate, because we're about to have a population crash. We've never seen anything like it in human history.
Do you know that 95% of the miscarriages and infertility issues.
Be careful with the words you use here, Philip.
Yeah, okay. That have been recorded relative to a certain procedure. 95% of it in our history, the time that we've recorded these things in the last 20, 30 years or so, 95% has been in the last 2 years.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, and I mean, there's all the stuff, you know, look up the life insurance actuaries and talking about all-cause morbidity. It's right there. And again, if circumstances forced you, or you were trusting or whatever, but you're hearing this now, don't give up hope. There's things you can do. Just for the love of God, don't give it to your kids. And just, I mean, don't give it to your kids, but God, I'm really worried about, in particular, making sure that our young women and girls don't have it, because that's the bottleneck for population. I see all this stuff talking about, oh, the sperm of men who haven't had that procedure is going to be so valuable. No, one man, one very happy man, could repopulate the entire planet. It's women that are the bottleneck. That's why hunters are given tags to go shoot bucks, unless there's a problem with overpopulation in deer in the area, in which case they give out doe tags. Why? Because it just takes one very happy buck to repopulate all the deer. But if you kill off does, that's what clamps down on the population.
Right.
And you'll notice that the spikes, if you look, the spikes concentrate a bit in the testes, but massively in the ovaries. Massively in the ovaries. And so, you know, anyways, we've sort of derailed here into it, but actually might as well talk here briefly about, you know, this whole depopulation thing and the Molochian view of this depopulation. I'm just going to go ahead and do an aside. This is all, you know, it's flows. It goes in various directions. It's probably frustrating for some viewers that we don't stay on task, but it is what it is. So there's this carrying capacity myth, the Malthusian kind of myth. Prior to Thomas Malthus, there was a person named Gianmaria Ortis, who was a defrocked Venetian monk, meaning that they had been no longer were a monk and were kicked out of the Catholic Church, which was a pretty big deal in those days. He preceded Thomas Malthus by 8 years and wrote Reflections on the Populations of Nations in Relation to National Economy. And the three major points of this rant against poor people, essentially, or regular people, was all economies are closed systems. It's very much the Venetian idea and what they needed in order to have their domination, very Molochian control. All economies are static systems, and he disregarded technological advancements or considered them unimportant. That's the big obvious disprover to that. And then number three, all wealth accumulation is also wealth privation. In other words, a zero-sum game. There can be no creation of wealth as new wealth, as all wealth involves debt. And this is where like fiat currencies that are debt-bearing instruments, all this stuff comes from that idea. From the ideas, not of this man, he just happened to really articulate them. Clearly, the Venetians were operating from this point of view way before this, because he wrote this in 1790, 8 years before Malthus wrote his monstrous nonsense. And
so, as we talked about before, there's probably a Venetian who tapped Malthus to encourage him, or.
And that's a good segue, because let's go back now to that point we were making about, like, the Venetians probably discovered these maps of the New World during that sacking of Constantinople in the Imperial Library there. So why didn't the Venetians go there? Well, I already explained they had problems with the Genoans and the Florent, or the Genoans and the Pisans, and also there was the whole caliphate there on the Iberian Peninsula at the time, and also the Spanish and the Portuguese when then they still made it very difficult, if not impossible, for the Venetians to go all the way over there and start doing their thing. There was no way they could do it and not be seen. And if they were seen, then their competitors would have an immediate advantage. So then, you know, you fast forward, and Columbus out of Genoa, and he probably had some Venetian help or whatever. He goes over to Francis and Isabella. And as Walter Bosley says, because we talk about this New World thing and in that interview with Walter Bosley, at some point they had been going for a while, and actually a Venetian family named the Zenos went with a Scottish family, the Sinclairs. So that's that Templar Sinclair and Zeno Venetian thread again in the 1300s, it seems, either late 1300s or early 1400s. The Sinclair, Henry Sinclair, went over and found Newfoundland at minimum, and maybe made his way further down to Boston and so forth. There's also strong evidence, and Timothy Hogan says this is true, the Templars went even earlier, which makes it sound like the Templars got maps, among other things, when they were involved in, to some degree, in the sacking of Constantinople, possibly for good reasons, to preserve knowledge, and possibly because it expanded their power. You know, I'm leaving it open. Obviously, I'm a bit biased that I wouldn't have joined the Templar if I hadn't have thought that there was something positive out of it. I believe the Templar are in a lot of ways responsible for help bring about the Renaissance, along with Cosimo Medici and certainly the Enlightenment. By that point, by the point of both of these, the Templar had been suppressed, but they had gone underground, in my opinion, and probably helped facilitate these Byzantine guys to come over and bring the Hermetica. There's a lot of evidence the Templar were Hermeticists long before this. Just some of their inner circle stuff points to that they were Gnostics and Hermetics. And that's what Timothy Hogan says. So when the Templar were suppressed, supposedly a ton of their treasure and also artifacts and antiquities were taken over to the Americas, and they were hidden in vaults. Timothy Hogan talks about this Timothy Hogan talks about this in my first interview with him on this channel, and that was a world exclusive that I got to break. I got his permission beforehand because the Templar were going to announce this publicly. I was told in 2019 at the Templar gathering, and I was given permission to say this. That's why I had to ask him to see if I could say it publicly. We were told that this was secret and we could not share it, but that it would soon become public, right? And we're low-ranking guys, so whoever Tim Hogan talks to and so forth, because there's clearly Templar above him, right? He's Grand Master of my order, but that doesn't mean there's not other Templar orders and connections that Timothy Hogan is connected to. I mean, I don't know that for a fact. I'm not speaking for him on here. That's speculative on my part, and no disrespect meant to Tim Hogan, who I hold in the highest of esteem. But he said we have been making decisions. I don't know who he means by we, but it seems to me that it is, Templar, right? Probably of other Templar orders. That's my guess. I don't know. Totally speculative. Not saying Tim claimed that. He just said we're going to announce, right? So he could have meant my order is going to announce, and maybe he is where the end all be all ends. I don't think so, but it's possible. But he said that the Templar have vaults in a lot of locations. One of them was looted, which was in Lebanon. He said by a government in the Middle East. I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm pretty sure you can figure out what government that is. That I'm not touching with the 10-foot pole. He also said there's at least one in Constantinople that the Vatican was trying to break into, and they caught him. He said that publicly.
Wow.
But more interestingly, there's major ones scattered throughout the United States, apparently. So there's the famous Oak Island one that was moved. That's why nobody finds anything there. But there's some that are somewhere in the middle part of the United States. That's about as specific as he was willing to be for obvious reasons. I mean, I have concerns about this stuff can be found with LiDAR and whatnot. And I mean, surely these people are smart and know this too, or maybe they've hidden it somehow sufficiently, so even you can't find it with that stuff. I don't know. So Lewis and Clark were Templar, as in the guys who mapped the United States for Jefferson. Jefferson also had Templar connections, apparently, not just Masonic, Templar, and there is a distinction there, right? The Templar are sort of above and beyond Masonry, though interrelated, and Masonry is really an offshoot or legacy of Templarism. So they apparently came over when the order was suppressed. They moved all sorts of treasure, including regular treasure, but also much more. And he hasn't, that I can't say. He told us some things that was in it, which would be pretty mind-boggling historical stuff in there. But he told us that we're going to open it in 2020. And then certain historical events happened, which put that on the back burner. Pretty crazy. So apparently Lewis and Clark, when they were making their way across the country, one of the things they were doing was checking on the integrity of some of these Templar vaults, which had been vouchsafed by various Native American tribes who they knew the Templar grips. A lot of the grips that are associated with Masonry are Templar grips, and that actually go back to mystery schools in Egypt. So the Templar, Lewis and Clark, would go up and they would shake hands with the tribal chief, and they'd give him the ye old secret handshake. And the tribal chief, Native American chief, would respond with it. And then they would even exchange aprons, which is interesting. And it's unclear whether it's because the Templar came over hundreds of years before that and had made inroads with these people somehow, or the other theory is that the Mayans talk about Aztlan, the island to the east that sank beneath the waves, which is awful close to Atlantis sinking beneath the waves, right? And they talk about how there was flooding and an island sank beneath the waves. This is on Mayan stela, somewhere on the Graham Hancock talks about it. I can't remember exactly, but somewhere on the Yucatan Peninsula, actually, there's a stela that shows people fleeing in boats from a sinking island. Exactly what they have at the Edfu building texts in Egypt that talk about, Atlantis seeking beneath the waves, you know, perfectly matching Solon's story to Plato. So it could be that there's an Atlantean connection there, or it could be that the Templar coming over these treasure fleets made inroads over some period of time with these Native American groups, taught them the handshakes and said, we'll be back in several hundred years or a couple hundred years. Be sure you teach and align, you know, trustworthy people about this handshake. And when someone comes who will look like us and gives you that handshake, then they can go check that. That's all speculative on my part. I want to be clear about that. What I just said is speculative. Lewis and Clark going across and checking those vaults, not speculative, at least taking Timothy Hogan's word for it here. But he's revealed that publicly now. He gave me permission on that earlier episode to reveal it publicly. And it's because the Templar have kind of decided that some of the stuff needs to start coming out because of, I believe that the Molochians are trying to make their move. And I see, and again, I am not speaking for my order here. I want to be utterly clear about that. I'm not speaking for my order, but I believe that the Templars are a spiritualizing force. They believe in free will. They believe in people can choose to worship as they want, basically all the stuff that's in the Bill of Rights, right? And I would, as a personal Ian, not speaking on behalf of my order, I would say that that's more that Luciferian impulse, right? Which is not bad. Now, Christians will get all triggered. Ah, Satan, blah, 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 blah.
Well, after they calm down, say,
after you calm down,
to me.
listen to what I'm saying.
Just 1 minute.
There's a distinction here. There's a distinction here between what I'm saying. And so I will tell you, my order does not say that. They do not claim that. I've never heard anyone in my order say that. There was someone who is a Mason that I used to know who was one of these people who is not in integrity. And he said to me that Masons are Luciferian. He claimed that Templars are Luciferian, for what it's worth. This individual, who is, I want to be clear, not a trustworthy individual. And that person is, I no longer have any contact with them. I would never talk with them again, ever, because they're not a good person. So that said, because they did some stuff to my ex-wife, I'm not going to get into it here, private stuff, but I don't trust that person at all. They're an example of this thing of where I'm talking about that there are corrupted individuals who behave in unacceptable ways, you know, who are Masons, etc. Right? So he claimed that. Supposedly, I haven't read it, but in Morals and Dogma, which is now open and freely available by Albert Pike, he says that Masonry is Luciferian at its core. I don't see Luciferianism as evil. I see it as neutral with certain positives. But when I look at Molochians versus Luciferians, there's no question to me who I would rather have running the show. Does that mean I want Luciferians running the show? No, that's not what I'm saying. I would much prefer that we had a golden age, total harmony, everyone being just totally loving and giving to one another with no agenda, no attempt to control, no hierarchies, right? But we're pretty far from that right now. And when I say no hierarchies, I'm not talking about fucking communism. Pardon my language, but I just get tired of, like, that's another one. People go, oh my gosh, people the same. It's communism, and it's
people don't know that communism was created by British imperialist think tanks and funded and run and profiled and orchestrated and carried out by.
And when I say talking about in harmony and living together and helping each other out, I'm not proposing that system. We're not anywhere near mature enough as a species to have such a system. It just wouldn't work. It would end up being something like communism as
but if we don't start now,
right? So I think eventually we need to move towards that. That's that kind of like, you know, traveling the stars, being being good to one another, stewarding this planet, for crying out loud. Actually, I'll throw the Christians a bone here, behaving like Jesus, because in my estimation, Jesus is an emissary of this most high impulse.
And some people say
so was Lao Tzu and Buddha.
Right. Some people say that Jesus, some people say that he didn't exist, but that he stands for that quality, that Christ in us.
Yes.
And right.
Yeah. And so
if we don't do it, no one will do it. the whole Messiah thing, as you said, is I think a great deception. The older I get, the more I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems
But
that
that's just me. I'm going to offend some people. It's okay if I offend people a little bit more.
Oh no, I mean, you know, like I'm just gonna speak what's true for me, and nothing I ever say on this show is the at the end of the debate. It's simply my personal belief, and I'm entitled to have that. And you viewer are entitled to say, wow, Ian's sharing some great stuff about the Black Nobility. What an idiot. Luciferianism, that's evil. I may ruffle some feathers. I hope not within my order, because I have nothing but respect for Timothy Hogan. I think he's a great man.
Of course, and he's a gentleman of integrity, and
definitely
he,
a gentleman.
you know,
A very definition. I hope to comport myself as him someday, as well as him. Yeah. So again,
I think one of the things that I consider like one of my missions is to move people. People have been conditioned to believe that that being offended trumps anything else, trumps reason, trumps facts, trumps the obligation to be open and listen to each other and really hear what somebody else is saying and follow another narrative, and then the ability to say, hey, I was wrong, or I need to think more about this, or I need to look more into this. These qualities in people, which we used to remember when we were in high school, that was like, wow, that's the sign of a mature person. You put aside you're being offended and you listen, right? Now it's like, oh no, you should never dignify the opposition by engaging in civil discourse or you know,
right,
or debate. You
and that's a totalitarian mindset.
You should get, yes,
and it leads to demonization, and it leads to
all the psychological plagues that we're seeing sweeping. I need to go in a minute, and I wanted to as I think I'm maybe more, you're more of the guest. I'm kind of the moderator in this forum. But it's still your channel. So what do you have a
wrap up?
You have, yes, and I have a wrap. I have finally some things that I'd like to say very quickly once you're
sure. So what I want to do is I want to point out that, you know, the Templar one over there, it looks like Henry Sinclair and the Xenos, right? So that's a Templar, Venetian working together. I believe the Templar are keeping their enemies closer, kind of thing, by working with the Venetians and seeing them as a useful vehicle, understanding that the world works the way it works, and that you have to some degree, work with these Molochian forces like the Vatican or the Venetians in order to get any headway at all. Some personal notes have said that Lucifer is kind of like the consigliore to Moloch at a deity level, interestingly enough. And then that's expressed with most of the clever ideas. The cleverness of the Molochians actually comes from Luciferian advisors who were working for them in that capacity in order to slowly but surely over time promote their agenda as well, right? From the deity down, then filters into the humans. But Sinclair comes out of Scotland. I just want to say real quick, the Orkney Islands specifically. He comes out of Scotland, and it's because with the suppression of the Templar, a bunch of the Templar moved up to especially Scotland, but to a lesser degree England. However, the League of Cambrai, the war against the Venetians, where the Pope and the French and a bunch of people temporarily banded together to try and smite the Venetians, and then the Pope stopped it and the Venetians were able to survive. They knew now, by that point, that's the 1500s, the New World's been announced, because as Walter Wellesley said, they needed the manpower to go exploit the New World at this point. No more secret missions. You got to go over there in mass, and you're going to need people to do that, and you can't keep that secret. You need manpower to go exploit the New World fully. The Venetians saw the writing on the wall, especially the League of Cambrai. They were losing power by this point, despite having all that wealth. They were losing power, and so they decided to farm out and move, and this will be covered in future episodes, up to Germany to some degree, right? Which that's Walter Bosley's 1,000-year conspiracy thing with the Junkers and stuff. You watch the Walter Bosley episode. And the House of Orange up in Holland. And they, for a while, stuck it out in Holland. And Amsterdam is very similar, the way it's built, to Venice, interestingly enough, and to England. And eventually they decided that England was the best place, as Philip often says, to facilitate that transatlantic control. And so that's all I wanted to say for a future episode. And that's why it looks like the English are behind everything. Again, it's the freaking Black
It's
Nobility farming it out,
It's the
franchising.
Venetian party that took control of England, and you can see the British East India Company. There's really nothing British about it at all. It's a purely transposed business model taken directly from the Levant Company, which was
Yes.
Venetian, the equivalent of that, and and we're still dealing with these so-called these machinations today.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's not really, it's a lot of noise. Sorry about that. I hope the sound is going to be okay.
It's been fine. There's been the occasional revving or whatever. It's been fine.
It's
fine.
It's Brooklyn.
Yeah.
What can I do?
Forget about it.
Yeah, forget about Black nobility. I don't know nothing about that.
Yeah.
I hear some things, but
yeah.
It's not, there's nothing. It's not the British people. They never benefited from the opium trade, and they don't benefit the average person. Oh my God, the people in Britain are under such severe tyranny at this point. It's really scary to see people being arrested for things they write on social media, and but I will. These topics very much dovetail. I think for the next topic, in fact, talk about, for me, what I can tell you I'm going to do is talk about these families that are not attached to kingdoms, who have kind of almost a global empire through conduits and connections and networks, families that are incredibly powerful, perhaps more powerful than when they did sit on thrones. House of Hanover, House of Savoy, House of Hesse, and then I could get into a little bit of the House of Medici.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
And show how organized crime forms kind of a bonding between Freemasonry and these families, how it all connects organized crime, dark Freemasonry, if we can call it that, and these Black nobilities. And we could get into a little P2 Freemason Lodge, some of the history behind that.
And they, by the way, are roundly what do you call it? They're basically excommunicated from Freemasonry. They're considered a blight upon Freemasonry. Tim Hogan even used them as an example of bad Masons. He has to be. One thing viewers should understand is you are one of the things you have to swear, and Tim Hogan nodded to this and confirmed this, it seemed. I mean, he didn't say anything. So again, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he didn't disagree with me when I said this. I'll say that. That's true. You are prohibited from publicly criticizing a fellow Freemasonic brother. And there's reasons for that aren't even necessarily nefarious. But yes, the problem with secrecy, which by the way is required so you don't get burned at the stake by the Vatican back in the day, or otherwise destroyed. That's why there was secrecy with like some of the Templar core beliefs and so forth. They had to be careful or they would have been killed. I mean, you said the Albigensian Crusade, they killed the Cathars for their heresies. So any kind of heretical thoughts, of which any of this Hermetic stuff, any of the Gnostic stuff would be seen as heretical, you would get burned at the stake. So that is why these organizations were secretive to begin with. The problem with secrecy is that whenever you have secrecy, malevolent types can take advantage of that. And so
they do. These spirits are out there, and they're we talk about sociopaths or psychopaths, or people with God complexes, people who are absolutely ruthless. And most people get blindsided when they come up against somebody like that. They freeze. They don't know how to deal with it.
They don't see the machinations until it's too late.
I know that the P2 Lodge was expelled by the Grand Orient Lodge of Italy.
Right.
It was major. Liciocelli was the founder. You had prime ministers, members of parliament, generals, admirals, Secret Service chiefs, bureaucrats, hundreds, I mean, top people who were swelling the ranks of this dark organization.
So
And
real quick, I need a real quick break, and then we can just do the final wrap up. Can you give me 2 minutes?
yeah.
Okay, give me 2 minutes.
Okay. I don't remember what position.
All right, and we are back. It's sorry, that was a little blurby because I cut Philip off by accident. We're back. I just needed a quick restroom break because we've been gone for a while, and I've been drinking plenty of LaCroix. I should get a sponsorship from these guys because I'm always drinking it.
Yeah, there you go.
So LaCroix executives, if you happen to be watching this, and once I get it to 1,000, I'll say how insanely, almost creepily addictive your coconut water is that has only carbonated water and quote naturally essenced. It is non-GMO though. It seems pretty good. There's no sugar on it. I don't know. I'm terribly addicted to these things. So part of me is like, is there something in it that makes it so addictive? I think it's because I have acid reflux, and so like drinking it kind of gets the yuckies out of my throat, basically. So anyways. Continuing, Philip, did you want to? You said you had some things you wanted to say, and I want to just give you the floor.
I just sort of saying what people can look forward to.
Yeah,
if that's okay with you, things
absolutely.
I will go into.
Yeah.
And then Guelphs and Gibellines too. I'll go into a little of that, and it's kind of interesting that way. You're coming up from the deep past, and I'm going to try to fill in things that are absolutely ongoing. I mean, that's the scope of this thing is enormous. We're going back into we're going back millennia, but we're also dealing with, this is not ancient, this is going on right now. So we'll come together in this way, and I look forward to our next encounter. I would like to have better sound. I don't like talking with these earbuds in, and my eyes keep darting back and forth between there. I see you, and then I see me, and then it switches back and forth. And
it's because of whoever speaks. It's a setting in Zoom that causes it to change. I have
I'm looking at you, and then suddenly it's me, and then I'm looking back up, and I'm gonna up my game and be in a more professional setting next time. People can I can promise people that, and promise what I'll get into, and very much looking forward to it. And as usual, you are filling in huge gaps in my knowledge, and it's something that I'm groping toward an understanding and appreciation of pretty much everything that you're quite well versed in. So it's always great for me I always learn a good deal, and always very inspired to hear.
Well, thank you, Philip, and full credit. And I just want to give him yet another shout out. I'm gonna get him on the show eventually. Walter Bosley's personal friends with him, and said I can definitely get him on. And he said in the past, if you're a member of his forum, you can have him on your podcast. I haven't asked him yet. I'm a little shy to ask him because I need to be careful, but I do have Joseph Farrell on a bit of a pedestal. Honestly, he's so incredible. He's so brilliant. And this book, Financial Vipers of Venice, a huge amount of what I talked about in today's show is inspired or directly lifted from Joseph Farrell's work. I want to be completely clear about that. A huge amount of what I talked about today. On my end, I want to get into the Florentine companies and kind of that tension between Venice and Florence more in a future episode. I would love to, if I can uncover more of the most hidden thing about this whole thing is I'm convinced as a practicing magician that there is a magical angle to all this. However, that is by far the most hidden aspect of all of this. And I just don't think there's any documentation on that because people were trained to be materialists. Most historians are very materialist. Joseph Farrell talks a bit about the esoteric aspect of things, but even he doesn't touch on a lot. He's an Orthodox Christian, and so he doesn't have he understands Hermetic principles like the universe is mental in nature, which dovetails to what you were saying earlier. That's starting to emerge in science. But he isn't a practicing magician, and I see broad strokes of it, but it's not something I feel super comfortable saying, well, it's a fact that Venice was using magic in the midst of all of this. one thing to keep in mind is that the universe is mental in nature, is a hermetic principle, and it basically underpins almost all magical systems, really. That there's a common surface between the human mind and the mental nature of the universe, and that it's not a semi-permeable membrane. It goes both ways.
It's
In
one
other
thing. In
words,
my view, it's just one thing, you know?
right. It's actually illusion. I would argue it's illusionary that it's not one thing.
Right.
Nonetheless, there is practical magic which impacts the real world, which is not something that I do 95% of the time. I try and use a very light touch, and it's usually to protect people, to heal people is when I use it. Rarely in the past, especially, I've used it for other things that maybe were more selfish or whatever, with the intent of that I would use whatever kind of material world circumstance in order to sort of further what I'm trying to do. But especially when I was first learning about magic, it was just, I wanted to see if it worked, and it does. Not always, but it's I was pretty surprised, like how certain things, like the degree to which it worked and the speed of it. But that is not what I use magic for. Like I say, 95% of the time nowadays, the 5% is usually healing and protection. The other 95% is personal development, integrating my own shadow, integrating my own thing. And I'm going to do more, viewer. I'm going to do more on the angelic magic series and talk about this process. I'm in the midst of completing. It's funny to say this at the end of such a dark topic, but completing a ritual with the seraphim. And when I'm done with that, then I'm going to be instructed on what I can share with people about what I've discovered. But I will say the past 8 months, basically since the turn of the year, have been some of the most rapid change and personal growth in my entire life. And it's been from working with the angels, and it's been integrating my shadow, coming to terms with my dark side, mastering that. And it's something that I think is really beautiful, and it's just made me a better person, and I'm more helpful to people around me, more loving to other people. And it's, the fruits of it are clear to me that it's a positive. It makes me want to help people more, and it's been reducing my own ego and my own desires for various things. And but also good things have been coming to me, I think, in response to that. That said, dark magic is much more in the other direction. It's very much about self-interested. And where is the line between, for example, magic and psychology, magic and debt psychology in particular, magic and archetypes, as Jung talks about, and magic and propaganda and mind control? That is a form of magic, in my opinion. Now, people say, oh, that's not magic. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it is.
It is. By the ancient definitions, it's very much so. And the Venetians, certainly, it's provable, used psychological warfare, rudimentary techniques of psychological warfare, which, as Philip has pointed out in the past, have been very much weaponized and maybe not perfected, but vastly weaponized and empowered by Tavistock, among other things.
Yeah, it's the leading edge of their whole operations. It depends upon this capacity.
And to bring it all the way back to the beginning, don't engage in blackpilling. It is black magic on yourself, which is always, it's on yourself first before you start doing it to others. When you do it to others, you're going to reap what you sow. It's going to reaffirm all your darkest thoughts. It's going to make
you're going to wish you hadn't done it. Honestly, you're going to wish you hadn't done it.
And are you against Davos, or are you for them? And if you're for them, then I guess figure out how you can get a paycheck from Klaus Schwab and see you at judgment, because you will, like, it's gonna come back around on you. But if you're not working for Davos and you're against it, which it seems most people are who are aware of what's going on, don't help them. Don't help them. Hold your tongue. If you have those feelings inside yourself, process them within yourself. Don't go out there and start blackpilling others just because you're depressed. We want to help you. And how we can do that is by you not depressing and causing people to become disempowered by saying that stuff. And so if you're finding yourself in that space, stop taking in this kind of information. Go out, get in nature, meditate, pray if you're spiritual, religious. And by the way, I honor any of your beliefs. even if you completely disagree with everything I said on a spiritual level today, that's your right. And I'm not trying to sit here and tell you what is true for you. I'm simply sharing, I hate to use this word, but my truth, which is to say my experiential and gnosis, in the sense of either what's come to me from my interactions with angels or other spirits, or what I've learned from knowledge from reading, or to a lesser extent watching videos or whatever, learning from people like Philip or Walter Bosley or whoever, and so when I share stuff, it's just like my opinion, man, to quote the dude from Big Lebowski. It's not meant to be some absolute, and everything
but there are no I mean, that's why we do these things. We're groping together, we're working together, we're evolving toward, because
yeah, absolutely. Well, viewer, I think unless there's something else you want to say, Philip, I think we'll probably wrap it there. Thank you so much. If you managed to get this far, again, I should be subscribing to you, but hit like and subscribe, hit the bell so you can hear the latest or get the latest episode sent to you. Again, if anything ever happens to the channel, I'm on BitChute. My website is down below always, whitelotusoflight.com. I don't do a good job of linking there. I really need help from someone. I just get overwhelmed with, like, especially I'm starting to do edits more, as you've probably noticed in recent videos, where I'm adding more visuals and stuff like that. It takes so much time. Oh my God. And so if there's some editor out there who wants to help me edit, I can't pay you because I don't make any money off this. I
can't pay you yet.
I can't pay you yet. Oh, see, Philip using neurolinguistic programming magic right there.
Right.
So, like, the way that I make my livelihood is people see the show and they're intrigued and they want to learn about angel magic, or they want spiritual counseling, which I offer, or they want their, in these times of where things are confusing, they want to have their Vedic astrology chart done, their natal chart for under 40, their Navamsa for over 40. So that's how I sort of make money off this channel. When we hit 1,000 subscribers, what I want to do with Philip is I want to do like a Black Nobility episode where we have people ask questions, and then if people want to do super chats, that's where it gives $5 or more if you want, $1. And then like those questions are like bigger and brighter and easier to see and whatever. And since someone gave me a donation, of course, I'm gonna prioritize those ones. But we'd ask, we'll answer questions for people who aren't doing the super chats. It's just that's appreciated. But that's at 1,000 subscribers. So share this video too. That helps and it helps me, to get on wonderful people like Philip and Walter Bosley and all the amazing people I've had on my show. It helps. I spend a lot of time on this, and I also have links down below how to get money. I don't know, I might do a Patreon thing at some point, but I'm spending a lot of time on this, more than I do on stuff that makes me money, actually, believe it or not. Setting up guests, trying to like warm up context, and sitting down.
It's a good investment. It's a
research. Yeah, and so it takes a lot of time to do all this stuff. And if there is someone out there who, I would need to, of course, like see your work and see how it works. But if there's someone who wants to help edit, that would be fantastic. I probably still need to be heavily involved in that, just because I want specific images put in there and stuff. But it's super laborious to go back, especially with Walter Bosley, because I was so excited to have him on. He was someone I wanted to have for a long time. I put tons of images in, and it took me like 3 or 4 times as long as the actual shooting of the video,
Right.
And of course I'm also reading, and all this stuff is very enjoyable for me. Not so much the editing, but everything else, the research and the shooting the videos and having the conversations, that's super enjoyable, but it all takes time. And so I don't know, I'm rambling here. It probably should just end here. Anyways, thank you so much, Philip. A pleasure as always to
thank you, Ian.
talk with you.
A great honor, honor, and a great experience, and it's all good. And we'll keep talking and evolving and moving forward. That's all we can do. And
and I hope you're having fun in Brooklyn with your son. And by the way, guests, again, the reason that I was talking even more than usual this time is because Philip has been busy and is visiting family in the States instead of being in Mongolia. And so we decided a while ago that I would kind of do the heavy lifting on this one. And Philip's going to do it in the future, which will be nice for me. So, and then I can ask him questions. So,
yeah, good. I'm looking forward to that.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, viewers, and we'll go ahead and end it there and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you very much.